My name is Robert Keding and I'm the founder and CEO of Gibbon Slacklines. So how did I discover the whole thing? Um, I started in 2003 as a product developer and designer at a company called Industrial. And basically, I've always been a very active person in the world of freestyle. I have been skateboarding since I'm 8. I've been snowboarding since I'm 12, 13. And so there's always been an affinity towards freestyle. So in 2006, a friend of mine came back from Australia and had discovered this activity called slacklining and was basically setting up a strap between two trees. And at first I thought like, oh, not another stupid trend, because as a designer you see often these situations where students try to reinvent the skateboard. So in that sense, I was not very attracted to it, but it started to annoy me a lot that he could do it and I couldn't. And from that perspective, I realized that this could maybe be intriguing or interesting. So when I went back to work after the weekend, I told this to a friend at work, and he said, like, do you know what? I did an apprenticeship at a toe strap company. I could organize something for you. And so I gave him a specification, and there I go. I had my first slackline. And I realized very quickly that it's actually fun. And I went down to where I grew up, where I would meet with all my friends who I usually go snowboarding with. And it ended up basically us having tons of fun because we were interpreting it in our own way. We were doing like surfy moves, trying to jump on it and balance more like on a skateboard or on a surfboard or a snowboard. And we realized, hey, this is fun. So I introduced it to all our friends down here in Stuttgart, and we all got hooked up on it. And so at some point I went to my former boss and said like, hey, Stefan, check it out. A strap and you can balance on it. So at this point, Stefan and me had been talking a lot about in the past how we could channel the ideas of the design consultancy into own businesses and own ventures. So at that point, Stefan was so convinced about this speech that he basically said like, come on, let's do something out of this. So we created sort of like a pilot project by making our first few lines from a local toe strap manufacturer, and went to the trade show, the outdoor trade show in Friedrichshafen in 2007. So the whole concept was that we realized we wanted something that is more accessible, more approachable, because slacklining had been out there for a long time, but it was very inaccessible because it was mostly focused in amongst climbers, creating something with the ultimate goal to go up and slackline in very high altitude, which is called highlining. So from that perspective, it was great because at the trade show, Dean Potter was there, one of the most famous climbers in history and one of the big pioneers in slacklining. And he was hired to walk across from one trade show building to the next. So there was the spectacular move. And in contrast, our simple and easy concept. So it worked perfectly from that perspective because people would look at what was happening up there in the highline, nudge each other and say like, hey, you too, pointing at each other saying like, are you crazy? Turned around, saw our line and said, well, that's what I will try. So it created such a great vibe and atmosphere that in the end, one of the purchasers of the Lufthansa Miles and More catalog came along and said like, I want you, and I'm going to give you the double page inside our catalog. So that was the reference and the concept of proof for us to see that there is a general interest for a slackline that is more accessible and that is more approachable and easier to handle and easier to use. So from there on, we created the brand and started our company, and it kicked off really well right from the start because we had, of course, this great reference of the Lufthansa Miles and More catalog. So in the end, it turns out that we became the most sold product in the Lufthansa Miles and More catalog in 2008 and 2009. And of course, with this reference, we realized, are we going to turn this now into a quick cash cow, or are we actually going to turn this into a real own self-sufficient culture, and are we going to support basically this great activity? And from that perspective, we decided to go ahead heavily into marketing. And the first thing we thought, which was great about our product, being so agile in terms of setup, we started doing some guerrilla marketing. And the first move we did was actually an activity where we said, like, we called it flash slacking or flash lining. So it was all about going into a city, rigging a line for a very short time, and in the end, before the police can come, we're away again. So we tried to prove this to ourselves by going across the traffic lights, which gave us only 30 seconds of time. And we made, even at that time, it was I think 2007, the quality was still at that time terrible, what we filmed, but in the end, we put it on YouTube. And it created some attention, and we started sharing this video to TV companies, and boom, we had 6 appearances in TV because they seemed to like this idea. So this was great, and from there on, we started to develop the whole sport, you could say, because we realized the whole freestyle aspect of slacklining was not really developed. So we decided to really cultivate this and started to build up a little team with dedicated young talents. And in the end, reached at a fairly quick stage, early stage in 2009 already, the first level World Championship contest formats, which ended up in January 2010 with the first World Championship in Italy. So from there on, it just kept on going and getting more and more, and which ended up that we got an interest from Madonna, which ended up for us being at the Super Bowl halftime show performance in 2012, and even managed to place our branded slackline in there. So probably we couldn't boast that we had the advertising which cost us no cent with the biggest exposure you can imagine on this planet. Up to today, we continued on this whole format, but in 2019 we realized we're stagnating. We're stagnating in the development of what we're doing. We're stagnating in the demand because there's not something new coming up. So we were really at a point where we were so deep inside the whole thing that we didn't have a perspective from the outside anymore. So at that time, Stefan and me decided we have to do something. So I got in contact with a guy, his name is Ray Garvey, who was an old friend of mine and turned out by today to become a famous musician in Germany. And he hooked us up with his wife, Josephine. And Josephine is a great person because she's very clever at what she's doing, and she's very fast at understanding things. So when we explained to her the whole story, she realized very quickly, and what she said was, well, see, I really like what you guys are doing, and I think it's absolutely spectacular what you guys are doing, but what you guys are doing for Pilates, I don't really think so. It's cool, but it's challenging, you know. But what I could imagine is something like a board, a Slack board for Pilates. That's what I could imagine. So I think from there on, it suddenly made click in amongst Stefan and me, and we realized, okay, we've got the impulse. We've got something to challenge ourselves. So at that point, it made click for me, because I realized this is something that I could really address and approach, because the funny thing is, the background how I actually came to design was during my school exchange in Britain, when I didn't take my skateboard with me. And it turns out the first guy I thought who might look like a skateboarder, you can always see it with the shoes, I asked him, like, where can I buy a skateboard here? I didn't take one with me. And he goes like, yeah, you can buy one of me. I was like, well, do you make skateboards? It's like, yeah, I make skateboards. So how much would it cost me? You could see how he was calculating glue, wood, together. It's like £5. So from there on, he became one of my best friends at that time. And it turned out, of course, that his father was the design teacher of the school. So this gave me great inspiration at that time. And I started making my own boards myself, where I realized I can get some material from here. There are some friends that have maybe some big old wine presses, which I use to integrate. And it turned out to be super fun and super inspirational for me, because it was sort of like the starting age for me of becoming a designer. So looking at the whole design, the main challenge was always is trying to get a feeling similar to slackline, which usually gives you not a tight rope, but actually a rope, a webbing that is dynamic. So it flexes and gives you this dynamic feel which you have with a slackline. But how can you do this on a distance of, let's say, only a meter? The webbings we have definitely are not capable, and we've tried out many different types of webbings, and we realized it doesn't give the same type of dynamic flexibility feel. So we realized the only way to prove this, or the only way to solve this, is to integrate the flexibility into the board, so that the board takes over the flexibility feeling. So back to square one. I started up going into my garage and building boards again. So the great thing about going into your garage or going back to making things yourself is that it is super satisfying. It is really a lot of fun because you get instant results. You can go into an iteration process where you can sort of like start asking yourself questions and answering them straight away by building samples and looking into the features behind it. So the funny story is that the whole history repeats itself, because at some point suddenly people like one of our athletes, Benny, suddenly started appearing. One of our specialists for events and construction, Felix, started kicking in, sort of like, what are you guys doing here? And everyone started to put their noses in there. And of course, last but not least, Stefan was suddenly also in the garage, and we were all building these samples. So once the samples were made, we could instantly just take a piece of webbing and just screw it on to the board and test it. So in that sense, it was super gratifying, and it was a lot of fun. And we managed to reach our first proof of concept in the whole structure. Can we create a board that can sort of like take over the flexibility? Yes. Can we create something that is strong enough? Yes. With the prototypes, we managed to at least prove ourselves that we can do it. And we knew once we got into the actual production phase with proper molds, because what we were using were literally just vacuum bags, there's a chance that we can actually prove this to ourselves as well. And we could sort of like start looking at what is the shape going to look like and how is the tensioning mechanism going to work like. So for the tensioning mechanism and for the attachment of the webbing, what we wanted is we wanted the possibility for people to exchange their lines, to actually enjoy not just owning a standoff product, but actually in time optimize it, upgrade it, and put more features into it. So we were able to prove to ourselves that we can create a board that gives you the dynamic feel of a slackline that at least seems to be longer. We managed to prove to ourselves that we can create a shape connected with a structure that allows us to basically use it intensively. Last but not least, we had to solve the whole topic of the attachment of the webbing. So there, I usually always follow one guideline, one principle. I love reduction. I just love reduction because it's so much harder. It's so much harder trying to reinvent something that is super simple and just works in comparison to adding another cog, another screw, another part into the whole system to solve your problem. So going through a whole iteration process of everything, integrating ratchets, trying to create special spindling and tensioning devices which are focused on sort of cox systems, adding down to the absolute bare minimum of just screwing it on. We realized that there's a solution within slacklining itself already, and that is a system called the line lock, which is a principle that follows an attachment process which allows you to give way in one direction and in the other direction it blocks. And we managed to create it in a way that it becomes user-friendly, understandable, and at the same time it allows you to tension the whole system. And that was, of course, also very much connected to the whole ergonomics behind tensioning, because we knew that if you want to give it some high performance features, it needs to be fairly well tensioned to give you this, at least some sort of a bouncy feeling. But at the same time, it has to be possible within sort of like the flexibility of the board, because literally it means you have to bend the board. So with this line lock system, we managed to prove ourselves that we can create something that needs now no metal parts, no extra tensioning device or system besides a stick that gives you extra grip, and that it's a reliable system that is super strong. But at the same time, when it comes to over stresses, it actually helps to this helps the sustainability of the product, because at some point it does give a little bit way, to which you can always retension, but like that it puts less stress on the system. So the next big phase, which was came again a comment from Josephine, was, I think it would be great if the board is produced in Europe. So traditionally, our production is in China for a very simple reason, not just because it is from an economical point of view, of course, always more cost effective to produce in overseas. There's a simple fact that nowadays ratchets are literally only produced in China. And the techniques for printing, for example, on webbing, is something that is very hard to realize in Europe, because the whole industry and the infrastructure has moved across the sea. Nonetheless, we realized that there's a huge potential behind the production of the board. So actually what happened then is we discovered via a smaller skateboard company, we were actually introduced to a guy called Tamás in Hungary. And Tamás owns a furniture production company. And he had something which we couldn't find with any of the other suppliers, which was basically huge presses. Because traditionally skateboard presses range only to a certain amount of distance and size, and therefore their infrastructure didn't give us any possibilities to integrate the whole thing. So Tamás at that point was an amazing person at the right time to find and discover and to create something from scratch, because he was down to the whole thing and he thought the idea was great. And he said, like, why not? Let's try it. So from there on, we managed to create our first production line samples, which we ended up testing, because this was the last big factor we had to prove to ourselves. Can we create something in the whole production process which really proves that it doesn't break straight away? I mean, it's impossible to create a structure like this. I mean, skateboarding, snowboarding, all the board sports proved it, that if you work with wood, it's impossible to create something that is indestructible. But it should at least be that strong that you can really go hardcore and you can really do crazy things on it. So we went into the testing processes. So it is a phase always that is connected with a lot of love and pain, because on the one hand it's ultra fun to destroy things, on the other hand it hurts my soul to see all these babies being killed. We managed to create a board, and we managed to create it in a way that is fairly sustainable. At the same time, it doesn't look like it's a sustainable product, because it was focused with nice lifestyle graphics on it, so that even though you may not use it, you can still put it in the corner and it will still look good. And I think that was important for us, because reality shows that products most of the time lie around, and like that they should at least be attractive. So out comes Josephine again, and Josephine says, great, I like your product, when I'm going to see the first world champion? So we go like, oh yeah, there's something missing, isn't there? Because just having a nice product is one thing, but slacklining proved it to us already. It needs much more than that. It needs the activity behind it. So it needed tricks, how-to, beginner guides, possibilities you can do on it, and of course explore the possibilities of freestyling on it. So that's what we did. we started kicking off. I just tried skateboarding again. Of course, broke my arm in that process. Nonetheless, it was exciting enough for me to play around with it, even though I was injured. And luckily enough, we have, of course, our athletes. And here, Benny, who'd been following us in the process, really very quickly helped us to discover so many new ways of approaches that we said, this is not really like slacklining anymore. This is something entirely new. So from there on, we realized this is something new. And we decided to really create new tricks, new moves, new approaches, new styles. And it became sort of like a hybrid thing. And on top of that, every good sport needs a language. So we started developing trick names, we started developing names which are used for transitions to create and develop combos and all sorts of things. And we realized it works and it's really a lot of fun. So I hope that we have created something as a starting point from here on that can really kick off, because it's just super fun creating a new sport. Yeah. Last two things. Okay. So what happened next basically was that crazy times, Corona, 2020, everything was going upside down. Things were going the opposite way around. They were supposed to be. Luckily, we were on the side of the lucky people, because lockdown, you need something to do in your garden. Slackline is something amazing. It's great. So this gave us, of course, a bit of an updrive and stability. But at the same time, of course, we didn't have the chance to create world championships and contests and all these things. So, and trade shows, of course, were down. So we thought to ourselves, why not just take part in the ISPO award, just for fun, to try out this little prototype which we had made ourselves in the garage, and to see whether it can compete against these big corporate companies. So turned out it did. We won the gold award, and in that sense put us in an awkward situation, because we actually wanted to launch this whole product in 2021 in summer, but turns out trade show is in February. So the whole story was out already, and it was creating quite a bit of interest. So in that sense, we were really happy about it. Which brings us to my conclusion. I think when it comes to starting off something in a garage, it has an amazing drive to it, because it gives you instant satisfaction. It drives you, it gives you back this entrepreneurial feel you have when you start something new, when you start a new company and you really believe in it. Gives you this being resistant from business as usual and turning you into something that just drives the whole story forward. And I think this becomes an addictive feeling, and that's why it's something amazing to get people back together and to make them. So I can recommend this to any CEO in the company. Get out there, get into your garage and do something yourself again, and don't just wait for some design company to bring you your solution.